Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel, and on today's video I will be predicting the 2023/2024 NHL season. Before we get into today's video, please smash that subscribe button and also hit that notification bell if you're new to my channel. Chances are if you're watching this video, that means you really love sports, and also drop a like on this video. So, we will start out in the Eastern Conference, the Atlantic Division. The Montreal Canadians, 66 points. The Montreal Canadiens had another bad season last year by being the second worst team in the Eastern Conference. Last season, they had a record of 31 wins, with 45 losses, and had 6 losses in overtime worth 68 points on the campaign. They haven't made the playoffs since they made the Stanley Cup final in the 2020/2021 season. Last season, their offense wasn't that great, ranking 26th in goals scored. And unfortunately, they were one of 7 teams to allow 300 or more goals. By all means, I think that the Montreal Canadiens will be the worst team in the Eastern Conference this season. The Detroit Red Wings, 85 points. The Detroit Red Wings missed the playoffs last season for the 7th consecutive year in a row. Their last playoff appearance came in the 2015/2016 campaign. And that was the end of their amazing playoff streak that started in the 1990/1991 campaign. Last season, their record was 35 wins, with 37 losses, and had 10 losses in overtime worth 80 points. Their offense last season wasn't that great, and their defense wasn't much better, ranking 23rd in the league. In the new season, I suspect that the Detroit Red Wings will be a better team, but they will miss the playoffs again this year. The Ottawa Senators, 91 points. They missed the playoffs again for the 6th straight season in a row, and that's the most non-playoff seasons in a row in team history. Even though they missed the playoffs last year, that was their best performance in a season for them since they made the playoffs in the 2016/2017 campaign. Their offense last season ranked in the middle of the pack in goals scored, and their goaltending ranked 20th in goals allowed. This season, my prediction is that they will be an overall better team and could be a playoff team if things go right for them. The Buffalo Sabres, 94 points. They had their best season in a long time, even though they didn't make the playoffs. Last season, they had a record of 42 wins, with 33 losses, and had 7 losses in overtime worth 91 points on the campaign. That was their first season with 90-plus points since their last playoff appearance came in the 2010/2011 campaign. Overall, they had the 3rd best offense in the league in goals scored, but their defense was their weakness, allowing 300 goals on the campaign. This year, I absolutely think that they will be a playoff contender all season long. The Tampa Bay Lightning, 97 points. The Tampa Bay Lightning failed to reach their 4th consecutive Stanley Cup final appearance in a row last year. In the playoffs, they played against the Toronto Maple Leafs in the first round. Unfortunately for them, they lost that series in 6 games. That was their earliest playoff exit since the 2018/2019 campaign. In the regular season, they had a record of 46 wins, with 30 losses, and had 6 losses in overtime worth 98 points. They had a top 10 offense in goals scored, and their defense ranked in the middle of the pack in goals allowed last year. I suspect that the Tampa Bay Lightning will make the playoffs again for the 7th straight season in a row. The Florida Panthers, 99 points. The Florida Panthers had a great season last year by making their first Stanley Cup final appearance since the 1995/1996 campaign. In that Stanley Cup final, they played against the Vegas Golden Knights. Unfortunately for them, they lost that series in 5 games. In their 2 Stanley Cup final appearances in their history, they have lost both of those appearances. In the regular season last year, they had a record of 42 wins, with 32 losses, and had 8 losses in overtime worth 92 points. Their offense ranked 5th in the league in goals scored, and their defense wasn't that great, ranking 21st in goals allowed. I absolutely think that the Florida Panthers will be a better team overall, and they will make the playoffs again this year. The Boston Bruins, 102 points. The Boston Bruins had a wonderful season last year by setting the record for the most wins in a season. But in the playoffs, it was a disappointment, because they didn't make it out of the first round against the Florida Panthers. At one point in that series, they were winning 3-1, but then they lost that series in 7 games. In that historical regular season last year, they won 65 games, with 12 losses, and had 5 losses in overtime worth 135 points. They had the second best offense in the league in goals scored, and their defense was the best unit in the league in goals allowed. This season, I suspect that they won't be as great as last year, but they will be a playoff team again this season. The Toronto Maple Leafs, 109 points. The Toronto Maple Leafs had another great season last year by making the playoffs again for the 7th consecutive year in a row. In the playoffs, they played against the Florida Panthers in the second round. Unfortunately for them, they lost that series in 5 games. That was their deepest playoff run in these 7 straight playoff appearances, and their last Stanley Cup final came in the 1966-1967 campaign. Their record last season was 50 wins with 21 losses, and had 11 losses in overtime worth 111 points. Their offense was good, ranking 11th in goals scored, and their defense was their strength, ranking as the 5th best unit in goals allowed. In the new season, I absolutely think that the Toronto Maple Leafs will be one of the best teams in the league this year. So that's my Atlantic Division standing predictions for this season. The Philadelphia Flyers, 69 points. The Philadelphia Flyers were an overall better team last year than the season before. But it wasn't a season to remember last year by missing the playoffs for a 3rd consecutive year in a row. Last season, they had a record of 31 wins with 38 losses, and had 13 losses in overtime worth 75 points. Last year, their offense was the 4th worst unit in the league in goals scored, and their defense wasn't that great either, ranking 22nd in goals allowed. This season, my prediction is that the Philadelphia Flyers will be the 2nd worst team in the Eastern Conference. The Columbus Blue Jackets, 76 points. The Columbus Blue Jackets had a horrible season last year by being the 2nd worst team in the league. Their last playoff appearance came in the 2019-2020 campaign. Last season, they had the 3rd worst offensive unit in the league in goals scored, and their defense was the 2nd worst unit in goals allowed. By all means, I think that they will be a better team in the new season, but they won't be a playoff team this year. The Washington Capitals, 87 points. The Washington Capitals had a disappointing season last year by missing the playoffs for the first time since the 2013-2014 campaign. By missing the playoffs last year, that ended a streak of 8 consecutive playoff appearances in a row. Last season, they had a record 35 wins with 37 losses, and had 10 overtime losses worth 80 points. Their offense wasn't that great last year, ranking 20th in the league in goals scored, and their defense ranked 19th in goals allowed. In the new season, I suspect that the Washington Capitals will be a better team and will compete for a playoff spot. The New York Islanders, 93 points. The New York Islanders had a pretty good season last year by making the playoffs after missing it the year before. In the playoffs, they played against the Carolina Hurricanes in the first round. Unfortunately for them, they lost that series in 6 games. In the regular season last year, they had a record of 42 wins, with 31 losses, and had 9 losses in overtime worth 93 points. Their offense last season was their weakness, ranking 23rd in goals scored, and their defense was their strength, ranking as the 5th best unit in goals allowed. So my prediction is that the New York Islanders will be a playoff contender all season long. The Pittsburgh Penguins, 96 points. The Pittsburgh Penguins had a disappointing season last year by missing the playoffs for the first time since the 2005/2006 campaign. By missing the playoffs last year, that ended their longest playoff streak in team history at 16 consecutive seasons in a row. In those 16 straight playoff appearances in a row, they made 4 Stanley Cup Finals in that time and won 3 of those 4 appearances. Last season, their offense ranked in the middle of the pack in goals scored, and their defense also ranked in the middle of the pack in goals allowed. This season, I suspect that they will have a bounce-back season and they will be a playoff contender all year long. The New York Rangers, 104 points. The New York Rangers had a pretty good season last year by making the playoffs in back-to-back seasons in a row. In the playoffs, they played against the New Jersey Devils in the first round. Unfortunately for them, they lost that series in 7 games. Their record last season was 47 wins with 22 losses and had 13 losses in overtime worth 107 points. Their offense ranked 12th in the league in goals scored, and their defense was one of the best units in goals allowed. By all means, I absolutely think that the New York Rangers will have another great season this year and will be a playoff team. The Carolina Hurricanes, 111 points. The Carolina Hurricanes had another fantastic season last year by making the playoffs again for the 5th consecutive season in a row. In the playoffs, they played against the Florida Panthers in the conference finals. Unfortunately for them, they got swept in that series. In the regular season, they had a record of 52 wins, with 21 losses, and had 9 losses in overtime worth 113 points. Their offense last year ranked in the middle of the pack in goals scored, and their defense was the 2nd best unit in the league in goals allowed. So my prediction is that the Carolina Hurricanes will be the 2nd best team in the Eastern Conference this season. The New Jersey Devils, 113 points. The New Jersey Devils had a wonderful season last year by making the playoffs for the first time since the 2017/2018 campaign. In the playoffs, they played against the Carolina Hurricanes in the 2nd round. Unfortunately for them, they lost that series in 5 games. Their record in the regular season was 52 wins, with 22 losses, and had 8 losses in overtime worth 112 points. They had the 4th best offense in goals scored last year, and their defense was a top 10 unit in the league in goals allowed. This season, my prediction is that the New Jersey Devils will be the best team in the league and they are Stanley Cup contenders this year. So that's my Metropolitan Division standing predictions for this season. Now, on to the Western Conference. The Chicago Blackhawks, 70 points. The Chicago Blackhawks had a horrible season last year by being one of the worst teams in the league. Last season, they had a record of 26 wins with 49 losses and had 7 losses in overtime worth 59 points. Their last playoff appearance came in the 2019/2020 campaign. They had the worst offense in the league in goals scored, and their defense wasn't that great either, ranking 27th in goals allowed. So my prediction is that they will be a better team overall in the new season, but will miss the playoffs again this year. The Arizona Coyotes, 72 points. The Arizona Coyotes had another bad season last year, but at the same time it was a lot better season overall than the year before. Their record last season was 28 wins with 40 losses and had 14 losses in overtime worth 70 points. They have missed the playoffs for 3 consecutive seasons in a row, and their last playoff appearance came in the 2019/2020 campaign. Their offense wasn't that great at all, ranking 28th in goals scored, and their defense wasn't much better, ranking 25th in goals allowed. So I suspect that the Arizona Coyotes will miss the playoffs again in the new season. The St. Louis Blues, 85 points. The St. Louis Blues had a disappointing season last year by missing the playoffs after making it the previous 4 seasons in a row. Their last non-playoff season came in the 2017/2018 campaign. they had a record of 37 wins, with 38 losses, and had 7 losses in overtime worth 81 points on the campaign. Last season, their offense ranked in the middle of the pack in goals scored, and their defense was their weakness, allowing 301 goals and ranked 27th in the league in goals allowed. In the new season, I suspect that the St. Louis Blues will be a better team and will compete for a playoff spot this year. The Nashville Predators, 88 points. The Nashville Predators were a pretty good team last year, but unfortunately for them, they missed the playoffs for the first time since the 2013-2014 campaign. Before they missed the playoffs last year, they made 8 consecutive playoff appearances in a row, and that was their longest streak in team history. Their record last year was 42 wins with 32 losses and had 8 losses in overtime worth 92 points. Their offense was their weakness last year, ranking 27th in goals scored, and their defense was their strength, ranking 12th in goals allowed. By all means, I think that they won't be as good as last season, but they will compete for a playoff spot this year. The Winnipeg Jets, 93 points. The Winnipeg Jets had a pretty good season last year by making the playoffs after missing it the year before. In the playoffs, they played against the Vegas Golden Knights in the first round. Unfortunately for them, they lost that series in 5 games. In the regular season last year, they had a record of 46 wins, with 33 losses, and had 3 losses in overtime worth 95 points. Their offense wasn't that great last year in goals scored, and their defense was their strength of the team, ranking 7th in goals allowed. So my prediction is that they will have a good season this year and will compete for a playoff spot all season long. The Minnesota Wild, 100 points. The Minnesota Wild had a great season last year by making the playoffs for a 4th straight year in a row. In the playoffs, they played against the Dallas Stars in the first round. Unfortunately for them, they lost that series in 6 games. Last season, they had a record of 46 wins, with 25 losses, and had 11 losses in overtime worth 103 points. Their offense wasn't that great, ranking 22nd in goals scored, and their defense was a top 10 unit in the league in goals allowed. In the new season, I suspect that they will be a playoff team for a 5th straight year in a row. The Colorado Avalanche, 104 points. The Avalanche had another great season last year by making the playoffs for a 6th consecutive year in a row. In those 6 straight playoff appearances in a row, they have won 1 Stanley Cup championship in the 2021-2022 campaign. In the playoffs last year, they played against the Seattle Kraken in the first round. Unfortunately for them, they lost that series in 7 games. Last season, they had a top 10 offense in goals scored, and their defense was also a top 10 unit in goals allowed. So my prediction is that they will have another great season again this year and will be a Stanley Cup contender all year long. The Dallas Stars, 105 points. The Dallas Stars had a pretty good season last year by making the playoffs in back-to-back seasons in a row. In the playoffs, they played against the Vegas Golden Knights in the conference finals. Unfortunately for them, they lost that series in 6 games. Last season, they had a record of 47 wins with 21 losses and have 14 losses in overtime worth 108 points. Their offense ranked 7th in the league in goals scored, and their defense was a top 3 unit in goals allowed. So my prediction is that they will be one of the top teams in their division and will be a contender to win the Stanley Cup championship this year. So that's my Central Division standing predictions for this season. The San Jose Sharks, 61 points. The San Jose Sharks had a horrible season last year by being one of the worst teams in the league. Their last playoff appearance came in the 2018-2019 campaign. Last season, their record was 22 wins, with 44 losses, and had 16 losses in overtime worth 60 points. The Sharks' offense wasn't that great, ranking 25th in goals scored, and their defense was one of the worst units in the league in goals allowed. So, my prediction is that the San Jose Sharks will be the worst team in the league this year. The Anaheim Ducks, 65 points. The Anaheim Ducks had another bad season last year by missing the playoffs for a 5th consecutive season in a row. Their last playoff appearance came in the 2017-2018 campaign. They were also the worst team in the league last year, and their record was 23 wins with 47 losses and had 12 losses in overtime worth 58 points. Their offense was the second worst unit in goals scored, and their defense was one of the worst units in the league in goals allowed. By all means, my prediction is that they won't be the worst team in the league this year. The Vancouver Canucks, 91 points. They had another disappointing season again last year by missing the playoffs for a 3rd consecutive year in a row. They had a record 38 wins with 37 losses and had 7 losses in overtime worth 83 points. Their last playoff appearance came in the 2019-2020 campaign. Vancouver's offense last year ranked 13th in goals scored, and their defense wasn't that great, ranking 24th in goals allowed. I absolutely believe that they will be an overall better team and they should compete for a playoff spot this year. The Calgary Flames, 96 points. They had a disappointing season last year by missing the playoffs after making it the year before. Last season, their record was 38 wins with 27 losses and had 17 losses in overtime worth 93 points. Their offense ranked in the middle of the pack last year in goals scored, and the defense ranked 13th in the league in goals allowed. So I believe that they will have a bounce-back season this year and will be a playoff contender all year long. The Seattle Kraken, 99 points. The Seattle Kraken had their best season in their history last year by making the playoffs for the first time in team history. In the playoffs, they play against the Dallas Stars in the second round. Unfortunately for them, they lost that series in 7 games. Their record last season was 46 wins with 28 losses and had 8 losses in overtime worth 100 points. The Kraken had a top 10 offense in goals scored, and their defense ranked in the middle of the pack in goals allowed. I absolutely think that the Seattle Kraken will be as good as last season and they will be a playoff contender all year long. The Los Angeles Kings, 102 points. The Los Angeles Kings had a pretty good season last year by making the playoffs in back-to-back seasons in a row. In the playoffs, they played against the Edmonton Oilers in the first round. Unfortunately for them, they lost that series in 6 games. Last season, the Kings had a record of 47 wins, with 25 losses, and had 10 losses in overtime worth 104 points. The Kings' offense was a top 10 unit in goals scored, and their defense was their weakness, ranking 16th in goals allowed. So my prediction is that the Los Angeles Kings will have another great season this year and will be a playoff team. The Vegas Golden Knights, 106 points. The Vegas Golden Knights had a wonderful season last year by winning their first Stanley Cup championship in team history. In the Stanley Cup final last year, they played against the Florida Panthers. They won that series in 5 games. That was their second ever Stanley Cup final appearance in their history, with their first one coming in the 2017-2018 campaign. In the regular season last year, they had a record of 51 wins, with 22 losses, and had 9 losses in overtime worth 111 points. Their offense last year ranked 14th in goals scored, and their defense ranked 11th in the league in goals allowed. I absolutely believe that the Vegas Golden Knights will have a great season this year and will be a Stanley Cup contender. The Edmonton Oilers, 108 points. The Edmonton Oilers had a pretty good season last year by making the playoffs for a 4th straight season in a row. In the playoffs, they played against the Vegas Golden Knights in the second round. Unfortunately for them, they lost that series in 6 games. They had a record of 50 wins with 23 losses and had 9 losses in overtime. They had the best offense in goals scored last year, and their defense ranked in the middle of the pack in goals allowed. So my prediction is that they will win their division. They will be the best team in the Western Conference this year. So that's my Pacific Division standing predictions for this season. So those are my NHL season predictions. What are your NHL season predictions? Let me know in the comments down below. Before you leave, please smash that subscribe button and also hit that notification bell if you're new to my channel. And if you love sports, this is definitely the channel for you. And also share this video with more sports fans. As always, thank you guys so much for watching. My name is Nathan. I'll see you guys all in my next video. Just keep loving sports.